world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analyticaliowan podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
We are back here on the Analyticaliowan podcast. It is Friday, October 24th, as you're listening to this. And we are in day 24 of this government shutdown. Now, it doesn't appear like the government is going to open today. They did not pass anything yesterday in order to do that. And the Senate is out now until Monday afternoon. So they are not going to apparently be passing anything today. They won't pass anything over the weekend. So Monday at the earliest before this government shutdown could potentially come to an end. Now, what is the government shutdown fight over? Well, every year Congress is supposed to pass a budget. We have not passed a full budget since 1997. We have been doing varying versions of continuing resolutions and stopgap bills, etc., and other funding legislation to where we fund it for a period of time. Now, sometimes that is for the full year, but it's not exactly the same as passing the full budget because of the way they pass all of the bills, etc. A lot of times they are only kicking the can down the road 3 to 6 months. And like I said, we've been doing that since 1997. But when there is no appropriations from Congress, the government shuts down because Congress controls the purse. Despite what Donald Trump may think, he doesn't have unilateral authority over where money goes, etc. And Congress decides who gets paid, what programs get money, and how much money. And this shutdown fight is because they couldn't agree to pass a budget. Now, they didn't even attempt a full budget. This was just going to be a continuing resolution that would have kicked the can down the road till November 17th, November 21st, somewhere in that range. I've heard both dates, but doesn't matter. That's barely anything. And it's getting to the point where the continuing resolution that they were attempting to pass isn't going to matter because by the time they get it passed, if they do, there's only going to be a couple of weeks, maybe even a couple of days left. They would have to pass something new anyway. So they couldn't agree to fund the government and keep it open. And what were they trying to do? Republicans wanted to fund the government at current levels, which included all of the cuts in the One Big Beautiful Bill. And they didn't want to do anything to extend the Affordable Care Act subsidies that are expiring at the end of the year. And Democrats said, wait a minute, if you do that, that is going to hurt people on health care, with their health care prices, etc., because they are relying on those Affordable Care Act subsidies. Their insurances are going to skyrocket. We need to do something. Republicans said, yeah, we'll talk about it later. Well, they said the same thing back in March. And in March, they faced a similar deal. They had to pass something to fund the government. And when they went to go pass it, Republicans said, just fund everything right now at current levels, and we will talk about it later. Well, later's here, and they're still saying, let's talk about it later. Now, those Affordable Care Act subsidies expire at the end of the year. That is less than 70 days away. At this point, what is it? 66 days, I think, 65 days, something like that. And by the time they come back, it's going to be even less. So there's not a lot of time left in the year. When are they going to want to have these discussions? It is going to take time for them to craft some legislation to kick the can down the road for that as well. Now, Democrats want those Affordable Care Act subsidies extended for a couple of years. They want it indefinitely, actually. They want to make it so that they are permanent, just like the tax cuts to the wealthy and the billionaires that were included in Donald Trump's One Big Beautiful Tax Bill. And as far as that goes, Republicans are saying, yeah, not going to happen. We can't afford to do that. We can't do anything like that. And what I think ultimately will happen is that Republicans will end up giving in on this and they will kick the can down the road, potentially to the end of 2028, maybe 2029, uh, trying to buy themselves some time. But they may also just kick it down the road to after the midterms and let the new Congress deal with it. But Republicans are worried that with the government shutdown and with everything going on, that they could lose the House. And that is a very real possibility. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the other thing Democrats want in this government shutdown fight is they want to restore Medicaid funding. Now, in the One Big Beautiful Bill, they put a bunch of requirements on getting Medicaid aid, and they took $1 trillion out of Medicaid on false pretenses. Republicans like to claim that undocumented illegal immigrants get Medicaid funding, and that's not true. Now, I have been hearing that certain states do allow undocumented immigrants to get access to Medicaid. And if they do, well, that is a state issue. That is funded by state dollars. But Republicans have always been good at shifting the narrative. Same thing with Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood uses federal Medicaid funds for other services because they provide more than just abortion services. They provide STD, STI screenings. They provide other general health screenings as a clinic would. And they can get paid for those, but federal dollars are prohibited from being used for abortion services, and they have since the 70s. But Republicans have constantly tried to rail against Planned Parenthood because they provide abortion services and keep using that as their talking point for reasons to defund and not give them any federal dollars, even though there are already laws in place preventing federal dollars from going to abortion care. And this is just what Republicans do. They latch onto something that isn't quite true and they blow it up, blow it out of the water, and make it a big deal. And they are very good at messaging these false pretenses. Where Democrats, when they have decent things to run on, they are horrible about messaging. They come up with the wrong way to message things. For example, several years ago when they were running on a campaign of defund the police, that idea of defunding police departments, Republicans were able to spin and, they just want to take away all the money from police departments and make it so they can't do their jobs. No, the idea was to take some of the money from police departments, allocate it to other services so the police aren't the ones dealing with certain things where somebody else may be more qualified. For example, if somebody is having a mental health issue, an armed officer is not the person to respond to that necessarily, but a counselor or a social worker might be. Things like that. But again, Democrats were so bad about messaging that Republicans won that messaging fight. So we're in the middle of this government shutdown, and Republicans know it is going bad. Now how do I know they think it's going bad for them? Well, Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin introduced a bill today, and we had said this bill was going to be coming up for a vote. This is one to pay federal employees, the ones that are currently working but not getting paid. And from what I understand, this would have stopped short of paying anybody who was furloughed. It was only the ones who are actively working and have been working to keep things going. And it did not pass. It needed, just like the funding bill, needs 60 votes to get past the filibuster. It got 54. Now, 3 Democrats did vote with it, but that also means a couple Republicans did not. And it was Fetterman, John Ossoff, and Raphael Warnock that voted with Republicans to pay the employees that have been working. Now, I don't think that Democrats specifically object to paying employees in this case. It is more of the bill didn't go far enough. Now, there were two separate Democratic-led initiatives in the Senate that were going to do the exact same thing. Um, One was going to back pay just federal employees that have been working, and I believe those have been furloughed just through whatever date they passed the bill. It was going to be just a stopgap. So if they passed it today or yesterday, it would have only paid them for work up through yesterday. And then however long the shutdown goes, they would have to do another one. Whereas Ron Johnson's version of the bill would have paid them indefinitely, including any future government shutdowns. The other version of the bill that also did not pass, both bills on the Democratic side they tried to pass with unanimous consent, and Ron Johnson shot both of them down because he said they effectively do what his bill did, and they just need to use the reconciliation process and amend his bill, and maybe they can come to terms. The second bill would have paid all employees for the federal government, including furloughed workers, and also had protections in there to prevent Donald Trump from firing a bunch of these federal workers using the government shutdown as an excuse. Now, with that being said, I think ultimately they do get something passed. Now, they're not coming back until Monday afternoon, I think 3 p.m. Eastern. So when they come back, it will be day 27 of this government shutdown. And it is entirely possible that they come to terms at least on back paying federal employees. I think they deserve to get paid. Um, Now, you also had another bill that is going to be introduced. I don't think it has been yet, but it has been announced with this government shutdown, and that is from Josh Hawley. And now Josh Hawley of Missouri has come up with a bill, and he wants to make sure that the government puts in SNAP money for November, that people on SNAP get their benefits. With November 1st coming, there are a lot of states saying they don't have the funds without federal money to pay out November's benefit. Some states say they have partial funding, so they will get something, which maybe that's a quarter of a month's worth of benefit or whatever, waiting for the federal funds to come in. And they're afraid that if funding isn't restored by the federal government, and this is going to hurt a lot of red states because most red states, with the exceptions of I think Texas and maybe Florida, are taker states, which means they take more federal dollars than they kick into the coffers. Whereas a lot of Democratic states are the exact opposite. They pay in way more than they receive back. But anyway, without those funds flowing in, they are worried that their constituents are going to suffer and not be able to have access to food. And this comes on the heels of the cuts in the One Big Beautiful Bill that also cut funding to food pantries. I'm hearing food banks are expecting higher than average turnouts, etc. And I'm seeing a bunch of posts from people saying, hey, I know in this area, here are 3 or 4 or 5 options where you can go for food, and if you need it, use the resource. And I encourage people to share those resources. Now, I know in my area, there's 4 or 5 different food banks, even in this small town, but most of them only give you a few days worth of food. It is not a permanent solution. So while they are expecting a higher run, and if they get more donations, they are definitely going to be able to help. But their funds are limited as well because in the One Big Beautiful Bill, federal funding for food bank programs was cut. Why? Because Republicans think it's just lazy people that need access to food like that, and well, they should go get jobs. They should work, except that's not the case. The truth is, there are a lot of people who have full-time jobs, working multiple full-time jobs, and still aren't making enough money to support their families. And in some cases, they're working what they are able to at the jobs they can find. We're hearing stories all over the place of places where people are getting asked to work hey, come work for me or whatever for a ridiculously low payment and no benefits, etc. And that's not going to work here. The economy is not going great. And if the job market is suffering, people aren't getting access to actual jobs. It is not as easy as just go get another job, go find another gig. A lot of people are turning to places like DoorDash and Uber Eats and doing gig work like that just to be able to afford their bills as everything is continuing to skyrocket and the cost of food is continuing to skyrocket. But this administration doesn't have plans to fix any of that. Um, I mean, I talked about it, I believe yesterday, where Donald Trump was talking about ranching and told ranchers that he knew more about ranching than ranchers did, and that when they say buying Venezuelan beef is going to hurt their industry, um, that they don't know what they're talking about. So they don't have decent plans to fix anything when it comes to food prices or anything like that. They are just, um, saying things at this point. And it's going to get worse. Now, with this November 1st funding for food stamps, that might be enough when they come back on Monday. Being the 27th, they may only have 4 to 5 days till the 1st. That may push them toward finding a solution. The other thing that may push them toward finding a solution is Tuesday, the 4th of November. And that is the few elections we do have here in this country that aren't just local elections. Now, I know in my town we have like mayoral races, city council, those kind of things. But in Virginia and New Jersey, we have governor races, which are statewide races. And if the Democrats outperform what they think they're going to do, and Republicans get blindsided by how bad they lose, especially considering Donald Trump is trying to influence those elections, um, that could change the tide in how they end up approaching this government shutdown. And I think the shutdown may have a major impact on especially Virginia, because a lot of federal workers do live in Virginia, um, and they could be the ones that are furloughed right now. They're shut out because of the shutdown. They're not getting paid. Well, if they're pissed off about not getting paid, and the Republicans have control of the House, the Senate, and the presidency, do you think they're going to be wanting to blame somebody? And when they go to the polls and they have a chance to elect a statewide officer, don't you think they may end up choosing to elect a Democrat instead because they're pissed off at Republicans? I mean, I do. I think that's entirely possible. And I think if the Republicans get completely blindsided and they don't realize how bad they're going to get beat by, if that happens, I think there is a good chance that might bring the Republicans to the negotiating table and they start actually talking about things and maybe coming up with a solution. Now, I mentioned Josh Hawley introducing a bill to make sure that November food stamp money gets paid out. Well, that bill, I believe, has not come up for vote yet. It may end up coming up, and I think Democrats may ultimately end up passing that. It would be a good sign for Democrats. It would make them look good. And their goal is not to hurt people, despite what Republicans may say. Republicans are trying to paint Democrats as evil people. They have for decades. Um, but they're not the ones that have tried to cut benefits, etc. Coming first of the year, I believe, with the One Big Beautiful Bill, and maybe as early as November with the One Big Beautiful Bill, there are going to be cuts to food stamp programs and added work requirements. I know some of those states are trying to delay it, and that's another whole issue. But with the One Big Beautiful Bill, those SNAP benefit cuts, Republicans are the ones who are actually trying to make it so people aren't getting paid or aren't getting food. I mean, they're making it so people aren't getting paid by having the government shut down. They could easily agree to extending the things the Democrats want in the short term. Give it a year, give it two, something. At least make some formal effort. but ultimately they're not doing anything. So when this bill comes up from Josh Hawley, there is a good chance it may actually pass. Now, that would take pressure off of both parties and actually make things a little better. But this is now the second time Josh Hawley has had to come out and try to fix something that he voted for, or that his party is partially responsible for. Now, this time I say they are partially responsible for the shutdown uh, because Democrats decided not to go along. I fully believe that the bulk of the blame does fall on Republicans because Democrats are at least negotiating. Um, but Republicans don't see it. That's why I said partially. Now, as far as what was the other thing that he had to try to walk back, and that was after he voted for the one big beautiful bill. He introduced a bill that has yet to pass. I don't even know if they have had any sort of vote on it. But he wanted to reverse some of the Medicaid cuts, some of those $1 trillion Medicaid cuts that after they passed it, he went, oh shit, we passed that. See, I don't think they intended for it to pass in the one big beautiful bill. You might remember I was on the Rational Boomer podcast around the time they were talking about it. What I thought was going to happen is, see, the House passed their version. They kicked it over to the Senate. They told the Senate, well, you need to fix it. Senate passes their version, which was even worse than the House version. And I think they expected the House to fix it. And even a couple of senators, and I want to say one of them was Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, had said it's not a finished bill yet. We need to continue the reconciliation process. It still needs some fixing and some tweaking. And then the House passed the Senate version with no adjustments. So they were expecting to go back and forth on it. I don't think they ever actually expected it to get done the way it was. They were just trying to get a win for Donald Trump by passing something and keeping it going in this negotiating phase. And then somehow they failed and they actually passed something that was restrictive. So Josh Hawley said, wait a minute, those Medicaid cuts, they're going to affect hospitals in my state really bad. We need to roll that back. So he tried to issue a bill that would do just that. And as far as I know, it has not gone anywhere. It's just died effectively. Now, that being said, I have not heard that he has been one of the ones trying to negotiate with Democrats in order to restore any sort of funding to Medicaid that they want. The other thing Democrats want is the return of the Affordable Care Act subsidies. And those subsidies are essential to making sure people can afford their health care. However, Republicans don't want to fund it. Why? Well, they want the Affordable Care Act to fail. And this is one way to make it happen. Now, if it fails and becomes unpopular, then they have an easier way to just repeal it without having to come up with something to replace it. They don't have any plans. They don't have any strategies to actually replace it, despite Donald Trump saying during his first term that it was, he had his healthcare plan coming in 2 weeks. We've been waiting. That was 8 years ago. Still waiting for those 2 weeks later for that healthcare plan. And then during the debate with Kamala Harris, he said he has concepts of a health plan. Now, what they realistically could do, what Democrats could potentially do, is to turn around and, try to pass something with the fixing of the Affordable Care Act to fix some of the problems. Just name it after Donald Trump. As unfavorable as that would be one way to get Donald Trump to agree to it, and he would put pressure on congressional Republicans to do that. So just because the government is shut down, that doesn't mean other work is not getting done. And even because the House of Representatives isn't there, that doesn't mean other work isn't getting done. Now, I have not heard when the House is coming back. It sounds like they are not going to be back till maybe Wednesday at the earliest. Mike Johnson has kept them out for over a month at this point. And one of the reasons he is continuing to refuse to bring them back into session is because then he would have to swear in Representative Adelita Grijalva of Arizona. She would be the 218th voice on the discharge petition that would force a vote on the Epstein files. So Mike Johnson doesn't want that to happen. Now he's trying to play it off, says that's that's not true, and that Representative Grijalva needs to get to work, etc. Here's the thing: two things wrong with what he says. If it's not true, why does it look like that is exactly what you're doing? Because you are preventing any other housework from getting done when she is going to be the next vote on opening the government. It looks like that is exactly what is going on. So if that's not the case and you're not going to block a vote on the Epstein files, open the House of Representatives, swear her in, and let's move forward with that discharge petition. But he also says it's not necessary because the House Oversight Committee is already looking into the Epstein files, and they're holding hearings, and they're releasing some information. And while that is true, the bulk of what has been released to the public so far has only been things like majority, like 95 to 97% of what has been released hasn't been new information. It has all been stuff that the public was already aware of. So what this discharge petition would do is force the DOJ to release everything. And there would be a lot of new information that would go out to the public. And they don't want to do that. Mike Johnson is refusing to swear in Representative Grijalva because he knows how bad a vote on the discharge petition could be. It could cost him his speakership. I've talked about this. But what could potentially happen, because Donald Trump wants the Epstein files to go away. And for the most part right now, aside from talking about not swearing in Representative Grijalva, the national talking points are not about the Epstein files in this moment. So this government shutdown is working out in Donald Trump's favor. He is distracting from it. Why? Because he doesn't have any other way to get away from it. He's lying about knowing Epstein. It's been proven that they know each other, that they're friends or were friends because Epstein's dead. But Donald Trump wants it to go away. He says things like, "Oh, are we still talking about him? Why are we still talking about him?" He said about how things were going in the 90s. Well, it was different in Palm Beach in the 90s. Which means what? In the 90s, it was okay for wealthy people to abuse young girls? I didn't know that was a thing in the 90s. I'm pretty sure that was looked down upon everywhere in this country in the 90s, but, I didn't live in Palm Beach. Maybe it was acceptable. It doesn't sound right, but Donald Trump wants us to believe that apparently. He's trying to twist and distract away from the Epstein files, and the longer he can keep the House of Representatives out, the better for him, because there won't be a vote on this discharge petition. Well, when they do come back and Mike Johnson swears in Representative Grijalva, there is something that is entirely within the realm of possibility, and that being that she gets sworn in, and then not long after they call for a vote of no confidence in the speaker. Now, it would only take like 4 or 5 Republicans and all Democrats to oust the speaker. And, would the Democrats save Mike Johnson? Maybe. They have no reason to save Mike Johnson, not realistically, not with the way he has been lately. And I've been thinking about this. I've been talking about it a lot in the podcast here. But the more I think about it, there is a chance they would save Mike Johnson conditionally. And that condition being, is the government still shut down? So if the government is still shut down, I could see Democrats saving Mike Johnson only to try to come up with a deal to get the government back open. But then when the government's open, especially if Republicans have to cave to Democrats, and Mike Johnson would then owe Democrats something, maybe he would be more open to negotiations, bring up a bill that would meet Democratic requirements to open the government, something like that. But if the Republicans caved to Democrats to open the government, again, Mike Johnson could be facing a vote of no confidence and be trying to get voted out. And I could see Democrats using Mike Johnson long enough to get the government open and get past this government shutdown. And then when they try to vote him out again, not saving him. They have no reason to save Mike Johnson other than it helps them in their negotiations. It helps them in trying to force an end to the government shutdown by then Mike Johnson owing his position to them. They saved him one other time because it was getting close to the election and they didn't want to have the House completely shut down going into, I think it was a 2024 election, by voting him out. But if they do vote him out, if Mike Johnson's gone, how long will it be until there is a new Speaker of the House? Well, it took them 3 weeks last time to come up with this guy. It took them multiple tries to come up with Kevin McCarthy 4 years ago or 3 years ago. Whenever Kevin McCarthy became Speaker, it took them like 17 tries to elect Kevin McCarthy, and he had to give up the farm in order to get elected as Speaker of the House. So Democrats don't want the House to come grinding to a halt because everything stops if there's no Speaker. All subcommittees stop, all of it. Like there's be no oversight committee. They wouldn't be able to look into anything with the Epstein files or anything like that. And they know that they need to keep the House open at least long enough to fund the government. So they may save Mike Johnson that way. Now, we've been watching what is going on with the destruction of the White House. And there doesn't appear to be any care taken to how they are just dismantling the East Wing. And it sounds like the entirety of the East Wing is going to be gone. It started with, well, they may have to take part of the facade off, and there's going to be an opening, and there's going to be a walkway going to the ballroom. It's what it sounded like initially. Now the entirety of the East Wing has been, or is going to potentially be torn down, and Republicans are trying desperately to twist and to defend what Donald Trump is doing. But there are laws and rules and regulations in place that should require him to get approval. There is a congressional panel on historical preservation in D.C. That is supposed to be in charge of all of that, including approving demolition. And they have not gotten any sort of plan involved for not only the demo, but the new build. And they don't know how much is going to be taken out. They don't know what's going on here. Donald Trump is doing this during the government shutdown, I think in part trying to use the confusion caused by the government shutdown to end up, getting his way. Now he is starting this ballroom that nobody really wants. I have never heard anybody and no politician really ever running on a plan to build a ballroom. And I don't even remember Donald Trump talking about building a ballroom during the campaign. This is something that came up after. And I think it's in part Donald Trump wants to build a ballroom like what they've got at his resorts. And he wants it in part because it would be a big legacy. It'd be a legacy item. Same with the Arc de Triomphe or the Arc de Trump that he wants to build. It's all about building up his legacy to make himself look better historically. Oh, look, I added 90,000 square feet to the White House. I'm going to go down as doing something good. Problem is, you're destroying the people's house, and he doesn't actually own the White House. It is given to him rent-free as a perk of the job. It is, a benefit. It is still owned by the U.S. government. It is owned by the American people. And there will ultimately, at some point, be major investigations into this. And when they start looking into it, they are could potentially be criminal charges for the people involved. Maybe not Donald Trump specifically, but for the underlings that signed off on it. That Schraff, his personal wasn't secretary or whatever he was, ended up getting put in to the head of the Congressional Historical Building and Planning Committee, who says, "Yeah, we don't have to overlook any destruction, any demolition. We just have to approve a new vertical build," and which is categorically false. But he potentially could face criminal prosecution, and as they're dealing with this. Um, Now we are hearing that potentially the dirt from this deconstruction of the White House is being shipped to the East Potomac Golf Course. Now that golf course is owned by the National Park Service, but there are apparently reports that Donald Trump wants to rebrand it Washington National Golf Course, and with a logo that looks eerily similar to a lot of his properties. Now he would have to end up buying it from the federal government, and that would be a whole nother issue that would cause people a concern if he ends up buying it. Now, he could potentially maybe rename it without any sort of change there, but he wouldn't get the revenue from that. It would just be him affecting a name change, again, trying to do something probably to build up his legacy. But apparently, the dirt from the deconstruction at the White House is ending up over at this East Potomac Golf Links, where they are going to potentially be doing some kind of renovation over there as well, and changing how that golf course is. And if that's true, that is disturbing. And of course, there will be congressional hearings when Democrats are back in control about that as well. This whole process is not going to end well for Republicans and for the people under Donald Trump who are just signing off and allowing him to do a lot of these things with very broad strokes. This is the whole point of the No Kings protest was that Donald Trump is doing things that he doesn't necessarily have the legal authority to do, and nobody in positions where they should be telling him no are telling him no. They are just doing whatever he wants and letting him get away with it. Now, we talked the other day about him trying to sue the DOJ or having a demand letter to the DOJ to the tune of $230 million for emotional distress from his so-called fake prosecutions. Now, they weren't fake prosecutions, and if he hadn't been elected president, I think he would have been convicted, and he would probably be doing time in a federal prison. However, one of the reasons we have to deal with it right now, well, two of them, is Mitch McConnell, because Mitch McConnell refused to impeach or fully convict Donald Trump during his second impeachment hearing, saying, well, his term is already up because it happened so close to the end of his first term that the hearing wasn't concluded until after Donald Trump was out of office and Joe Biden was in office. He said, well, Donald Trump is out of office. It doesn't really matter. It's not a political matter anymore. This is a criminal matter. And basically said the DOJ needs to do something about it. Well, then we had Merrick Garland appointed to head the DOJ. And I thought he was going to be a decent attorney general. And then he sat on his hands, in part because he felt that this was a political matter and that the political process, like impeachment, should have been the one to deal with Donald Trump and didn't. So Donald Trump should have been dealt with early on. If he would have appointed Jack Smith instead of what he did, but say in March of 2021, Donald Trump's cases would have already been through. He wouldn't have been able to use the I'm running for office as an excuse because it would have been too far away from the general election, and he probably would have been convicted. But we're dealing with that now. And he is asking for $230 million for these for emotional distress. And he's claiming that, well, because of the way these payments work out, his appointed personnel are going to be the ones to sign off on it, and ultimately it may end up in front of his desk looking for a signature. He even admitted that it's kind of bizarre that he's the one who gets to sign off on this payment, and he effectively would be paying himself. Well, that reeks of corruption and that reeks of problems. So, two members of the House Oversight and Judicial Committees, Jamie Raskin and Representative Robert Garcia, have sent a letter to Donald Trump asking, and the DOJ asking for all information about it, that the Oversight and Judicial Committees are going to be looking into this. Now, they are limited in what they can do because they are the minority party right now. But that being said, when they are the majority, again, after the midterms, if they haven't found a decent resolution to any of this, they may continue to look into this, and this may end up leading to another impeachment of Donald Trump. It is ridiculous that he is even considering being able to ask the DOJ for $230 million. The fact he even mentioned it, if it was a Democrat, Republicans would be losing their minds. But because it's Donald Trump, like always, they are just finding ways to excuse it. There's no reason for Donald Trump to get that kind of money. The type of payment they're talking about is for things like what he is doing to James Comey, Letitia James, it's Adam Schiff, vindictive prosecution. In fact, there's another name added to that list, and that name is Nancy Pelosi. Apparently, Attorney General Pam Bondi is opening an investigation into former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. Why? Because Nancy Pelosi just made a comment saying that as ICE is looking into going into San Francisco and to Southern California, that if they violate the law in California, that they could potentially be arrested. Now, I don't think that is actually that egregious of a statement or anything else, but of course they are trying to say and trying to build up some kind of a case that she intends to obstruct justice or that she's going to impede their investigations. Well, here's the thing. What she said was if they break the law, they could be charged in California. Now, that sounds reasonable to me. And if you have to break the law in order to, do your investigation or do what you are trying to do, you shouldn't be doing what you're doing if you're law enforcement. If you're ICE, if you're immigration enforcement, you shouldn't have to break the law to enforce the law. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But see, ICE agents, a lot of these we are finding out they're not passing basic fitness tests. Some of them aren't passing background checks or drug screens. But because they're trying to ramp up efforts, they are already deep into their training before those things come back. Some never got fingerprinted. Some never had a fully completed background check. It is just ridiculous here. And these investigations into all of the people connected with Donald Trump, now those people potentially could have a claim for emotional distress, etc., against the DOJ. They would have a better claim than what Donald Trump currently does. And Donald Trump wanting $230 million is weird because that was the initial price tag he had for his one big glorious ballroom here that they don't that nobody wants. Nobody wanted it except Donald Trump. No politicians were saying, what would look great on the grounds of the White House? A ballroom. In fact, I hadn't really been talking about it because I kept thinking that, hey, this is going to take congressional approval and they're not going to sign off on it. I figured for sure it was just going to be something that he kept saying, we're going to start it soon. We're going to start it in 2 weeks. That kind of thing. And we were going to hear about it all the way to the end of his term. Now, if he doesn't make it to the end of his term or it's not finished by the end of his term, he's got another problem. Or, well, the Republicans do, and maybe even the next administration. What do? Do they finish it? Do they tear it down? Even if it is finished, do they tear it down and restore the East Wing back to what it looked like? because it's not something we really needed. Where's that line? What do you do? And then, how do you, if you tear it back down after Donald Trump spent all that money, how do you get around the claims of wasting money to tear it down? Now, with building this ballroom, the Republicans and MAGA supporters are trying to find ways to justify um, what they're doing by looking at what previous presidents had done. Like they point to the Kennedys putting in the Rose Garden. Well, that didn't affect the structure of the White House. Sure, they go all the way back to Truman, basically gutting it down to bare bones and rebuilding a lot of it. They did, but they did it in a certain way to help maintain the structure, et cetera, and to preserve the White House in a way. And then they point to Barack Obama adding a basketball court. And they lost their minds when Barack Obama added a basketball court on the grounds of the White House. Except all he did was install a basketball hoop on both ends of a tennis court and add paint to a tennis court to paint it like a so it could be multi-purpose, like you see at a lot of schools. You will see schools sometimes have, like, on their playgrounds, they will have it painted for basketball and painted maybe for tennis or something else. I've seen that happen, a lot. I've seen some schools have, their baseball diamond and their football stadium together because that's what they need to do because it's a cost saving and a space saving measure. There was nothing wrong with what Barack Obama did. And him adding that basketball court did not affect anything as far as the structure of the building. It was a separate thing. It was some paint and adding in a basketball hoop. It cost a couple $1,000, maybe. Maybe. It wasn't that big of a deal. We are not talking about a $230 million gaudy ballroom that is going to be a building bigger than the White House currently itself, where you have to tear out part of the East Wing or the East Wing entirely to build. Those are two entirely different things. Not even close to the same thing. But that's what Republicans do a lot, and a lot of MAGAs do. They try to find something even close to similar and say, well, same thing, so Donald Trump gets to do what he wants. Even if Barack Obama didn't have the authority to add in that basketball hoop, which he did, because that, again, didn't affect the structure of anything. It's not anywhere close to the same thing because of the key differences, in part because they didn't tear out part of the building, and because there's a massive price difference between the two. It wasn't anywhere close to the same thing, but Republicans don't care about that. And then Donald Trump was talking about bombing boats from Venezuela. Now, he keeps blowing up these boats in Venezuela or coming from Venezuela, or what he says are coming from Venezuela, in international waters. Now, he is saying that they are running drugs. And then Donald Trump says, well, we may ultimately end up having to go to the land too and do land strikes. And the land's worried about us because, they know we're coming and we're going to prevent it. We may have to go to Congress, but what would Congress say? Are they going to say they want the drugs to continue coming in by land? Of course they'll greenlight it. Donald Trump is talking about doing military strikes in Venezuela, akin to going to war. He would need a declaration of war from Congress to do this. And would there be the appetite in Congress for it? Probably not. There's already been attempts to pass bipartisan legislation in the Senate to scale back and limit Donald Trump's ability to use the military in certain ways, especially after his airstrikes in Iran and now him bombing these boats in Venezuela. They want to claw back his ability and force him to have to go to Congress, which he should already have to do by way of the Constitution, which says only the Senate has the ability to declare war. And I thought Donald Trump was the peace president. He was supposed to be, getting the Nobel Peace Prize for ending the war in Gaza, which he really didn't do. It sounds like the ceasefire's already been broken and they're back to fighting again. So that's in jeopardy. And, he hasn't ended the war in Ukraine. Some of the wars he claims to have stopped, they didn't have that big of part in actually stopping it. They just happened to stop under his term. So he's taking credit, but Donald Trump taking credit for something somebody else does. That's about par for the course. With that, he wants to do strikes into Venezuela. That is not a peaceful thing. He should need congressional approval to do any of that. We'll see if he actually attempts it or if he goes around Congress. And that may be the bridge too far for Republicans. Again, they seem to be willing to back anything he does so far. But if they find that bridge, if they find that point when he has gone too far, they may have to impeach and remove him themselves. And I've said it before when it comes to that. If they choose to impeach him, then and articles get drawn up, et cetera, and voted on that were introduced by a Republican in the House of Representatives, I fully expect him to be convicted and removed in the Senate. Why? Because I guarantee you they're having conversations behind closed doors. And that, whatever Republican representative, and because she is sounding like the voice of reason right now, I'm going to, not that I have heard that she is going to do this by any means, but let's just say for sake of argument, it's Marjorie Taylor Greene, that she wants to impeach Donald Trump. She wouldn't bring it to the vote unless she knew for sure it was going to pass the House and that she knew the Senate was going to vote on it. I guarantee you. Why? Because you don't swing at somebody in your own party like that unless you have the votes to make it happen. Now, famously, when Richard Nixon did Watergate, the Republicans had control of Congress, and they went to him and said, look, we got the votes. You either resign or we will vote you out. And he resigned. Now, Donald Trump would not resign if they went to him and said, hey, you need to stop doing these things because we have the votes to remove you. We're telling you to stop. His ego and his personality would not let him stop. He would come out, he would publicly bash all of them, call them rhinos, do this, do that, and he would view them as disloyal to him, and he would almost tempt them and say, do it, make it happen, make it so that I get impeached again. Because he believes he is untouchable, that he's made a Teflon or something, and that he has this death grip on the Republican Party. So if, on the off chance, Republicans bring forward a motion to impeach, I fully expect it to end up passing in the House and him getting removed in the Senate, which would bring up J.D. Vance. Now, J.D. Vance may be worse in some ways than Donald Trump, but he doesn't have the full support of Congress, and he wouldn't, especially after they have just impeached and removed a president for the first time. J.D. Vance would be walking on eggshells. He would be too busy trying to rebrand the Republicans heading into 2028. And they've got their own worries. They're worried about getting reelected in the midterms. So if they impeach and remove Trump before the midterms, they may try to use that as some kind of way to counter what potentially could happen in the midterms. Now, even with this redistricting going on in Texas, it sounds like California is going to pass Prop 50, which would offset those 5 votes. And now we're hearing that Indiana, where they were trying to get one more seat, has so far rejected it. So that's not happening. Missouri redrew and got rid of one more seat. And a couple other places have redrawn and taken out 1 or 2 seats for Democrats. Here's the problem. I don't think it's going to matter. This is desperation on the part of Republicans, trying desperately to hold on to the House in the midterms. And it is entirely possible that the Democrats, take the House by 30 or 40 seats. And if they do, that is game over for Republicans because they would at least be out for 2 years. Now, it doesn't matter if the Democrats take the House and they have a 1-seat majority or a 40-seat majority. Not really, because none of their priorities are going to get passed between the start of 2027 and the end of Donald Trump's term. Now, they're just not going to get their priorities passed. The big things they can do is block things that Donald Trump wants to do by not caving to his will and having investigations. They would be having investigations into things like the ballroom, into things like him trying to get a $230 million payment from the DOJ, investigations into these strikes in Venezuela or on Venezuelan boats, etc. And because they would be in the majority, they would have access to the subpoena power. They would be able to actually have some teeth when it comes to doing things and exposing a lot of the criminality of the Republican Party. And when that happens, let me tell you, it is going to change and shake up how things play out going into 2028. All right. Beyond that, there's a chance that the Democrats get the Senate. And if the Democrats get the Senate, and I know it's a long way to go, it requires a 4-seat pickup. And that is not necessarily feasible given the current map, etc. However, if they pick up 4 seats, think about this for a minute. Donald Trump wants to start, filling other positions, or he wants to put, he fires, let's just say Marco Rubio for whatever reason, because I'm surprised not very many people out of this administration have been fired so far. I think in part because he knows he can't get too many other people to fill those roles. But let's say he's got a falling out with Marco Rubio and Democrats have control of the Senate. He won't be able to put in some right-wing crazy nut job because they wouldn't get through confirmation process in the Senate. They could hold it up and prevent a lot of things like that from happening. It is very important that Democrats take the Senate in 2026 to prevent things like that, to also prevent him from getting, another Supreme Court judge through. If they get the Senate and say in 2028 something happens to Thomas or Alito, they could potentially do what Mitch McConnell did, and they could hold up those nominees saying, well, it's too close to the election. We got to let the American people decide, and not hold any votes and just keep the seat open. Or they could force Donald Trump to pick somebody relatively normal, moderate. But I think the best play would be to hold it up and to make sure that that doesn't happen, that seat is open for what I would presume would be a Democrat in the as a winner of the 2028 general election. All right, so that's going to do it for today's episode of the Analytical Iowan podcast. I appreciate you taking the time to listen, and I will be back tomorrow with even more, because there's always something going on in the world of news and politics, especially right now.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.